Welcome to the Riga Security Forum 2025. I have the pleasure to speak with Alena Kudzko, who is a director of US GLOBSEC Foundation. I have had the pleasure to working with you while coordinating Riga conference. I had the honor also to call Slovaks, our brothers, because you had similar conference as we are organizing in Riga, and it was really great to see how the Slovaks and people and young people from the Visegrad region particularly were shaping the decisions and offering quality decisions, for the leaders at NATO, Brussels, European Union, but also other institutions to make sure we have a better future. And it is also great to see how your foundation, GLOBSEC, has expanded and established a branch in the United States, the country, I think, that is indispensable to the liberal democratic order, stability, security for Europe, and the one that has actually always supported the engagement of like-minded democratic countries. Together with the Visegrad countries, I was really happy to see the support that we received, from the region when there was a discussion about the Baltic accession to NATO, and we are glad that we received the support from Central Eastern Europe. And even though there is a little trade between us, with the exception of Poland, it's almost like a glue that holds us together. There's some kind of invisible link or shared identity that brings the Baltic states and you together. Therefore, we have also looked at you as our voice, our shared interests within the transatlantic community. What I wanted to ask about the recent events in the United States with the change of the administration in the White House, probably one of the first presidents who really sticks to everything he has said before the election and tries to implement by imposing tariffs on allies and adversaries, on major trading partners and powers such as China, but also the European Union. How do you see these recent changes and challenges from policy announcement to the implementation have changed the United States internally?
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I always love coming to Riga. For us, also Baltic states are very important, also because of history, but also because today on many issues we have a very shared understanding of the world, be it the war in Ukraine or any other issues. So always happy to be here, and thank you so much, guys, for everything that you are doing.
Very welcome.
In terms of the United States, of course, the important thing to know about what's very different right now is that, especially for President Trump, and he openly says that his first priority is the United States. And he genuinely believes, and many Americans who voted for him also do believe, that the way how the world is arranged right now, especially the economic system, is not particularly beneficial for the United States. They do think that the trade deals that they had with other countries are not favoring the United States, and they really want to renegotiate them. So that's why the default position is we go into renegotiations of all possible deals, be it with allies or with other countries, doesn't matter. We want to get a better deal for the United States. So the first trend is that we see is that everything's up for negotiations. They don't think that there are things that should be untouched, even if it's relations with allies. Everything has to be rediscussed right now. Often, because you start with this position that we need to renegotiate the deal and tariffs are the default starting point how to do that, what we see in effect is that, okay, some tariffs are announced, but then the actual conversation starts in terms of what it actually means in practice. Does it actually make sense in particular areas, or we're going to renegotiate something, or we need to make some adjustments because it's actually not beneficial even for the United States in some parts. So the big announcements of tariffs is usually a starting point. And then all the countries go to Washington and try to make a better deal out of what was on the table. So the end result is always something different than the official announcement, also because the United States understands that sometimes there are better ways to make it beneficial for Americans. The general notion is that Americans are trying to return a lot of manufacturing back to the United States. So there is a lot of pressure on companies to move, let's say, car plants or be it defense manufacturing or production of iPhones to make sure that it's all manufactured in the United States. This is done for two reasons. First one, of course, it's jobs for Americans, because Americans are concerned that everything's done elsewhere and they don't really have jobs for Americans. But the second part is there is this uncertainty that if somebody else is manufacturing it, it means that maybe they're not going to sell it to Americans, or maybe there is going to be some shortage of important things that Americans need. So there are these two dynamics that are coming in place and pressuring this return of manufacturing back to the US.
Thank you so much. And do you see this trend and the objective to return the manufacturing to the United States and also to renegotiate some important items? How does it affect, for example, the United States economic standing, international, for example, with such competitors? I would say in the United States, China is a security challenge and economic challenge. For Europeans, it's still an opportunity, at least how I see the debates evolving around building closer relationship with China or restricting China's influence in Europe or somewhere else. There are already some restrictions, different from Europe. For example, on TikTok, there is a huge debate if to allow this company to operate freely in the United States with US ownership or not before, because of the data and the competition between the global technology. Everything Trump does is converse to what Joseph Nye said the United States should do to wield soft power, have a really good social impact on the allies, and achieve something that other powers use with the economic or military coercion and threats, against other states. And I think the United States had this capacity, with the trade and companies and investment, to be the focal point for alliances across the Atlantic, but also the Pacific region. Do you see this new policy of Trump administration, trade and renegotiation, is affecting the alliances now the United States used to have?
Yeah, the philosophy now is rather different from this more traditional understanding of soft power. And the philosophy is that if you only have soft power, but you don't have the strongest military or the strongest economy, you're being taken advantage of. And that's how Trump sees the world. So priority is to make sure that the American military power and economic power is unsurpassed in the world, and then others will have no other choice but to work with you. And okay, if you have soft power, great. If you don't have soft power, also not that important, because you'll get your way one way or another. So of course, in practice, and you asked about how it compares with the Chinese efforts and what it means for China. In fact, it was the observations of what China is doing that made America very worried, because first there was this concern that China is not always playing fair. There is, of course, a lot of subsidies for Chinese industries. Then they start dumping, for example, Chinese products on different markets. And American companies, in the view of the Americans, again, are being taken advantage of, because they try to play fair, they try to play by some market rules, and you can't really compete with China because China doesn't follow these rules. So this is a way to kind of overcorrect and make sure that, okay, we can then support our American industries and to make sure that they receive at least some protection from these unfair practices that the Chinese are having. And of course, now it's becoming even more complicated because this issue of technology comes in. Trump understands very well that the countries that have the better technological development will be the most powerful, be it militarily or economically or basically in every part of the society imaginable. That's why now some of the important trade discussions concern sensitive technologies. For example, Americans understand that China is actually now a very different place. There's a lot of innovation that's going on in country. China is actually very good in making sure that this technological innovation is very quickly dispersed across different sectors of the economy. But what's also important is that China can do that because in some ways they buy certain components from the United States. For example, let's take the chips. Americans are the best in the world in terms of producing this latest generation's chips that are used by AI companies to train their models. And China is pretty far behind in providing comparable technology when it comes to chips. So what Americans decided to do is to restrict the export of these most advanced chips to China. Exactly because they understand that we need to actually develop ourselves faster, and it's not seen as beneficial to sell this latest technology to China because China takes it and jumps ahead, and that's not good for the United States. So this is one most important and sensitive area of these trade relations, the export of most important consequential technologies. But now it's becoming even more complicated because China also has its advantages in other areas. And one most important one is that over the past 30 years, China has strategically invested a lot of money in developing domestic industries in everything that concerns either the discovery of critical raw materials, extraction them, but also processing of critical raw materials. So for all the technologies or for the military production or for like any productions of cars and everything, we need certain minerals that now China is the both dominant producer of, and also China knows how you take these minerals from the ground and make them useful for use, let's say, in the iPhone or fighter jet or a car. So what China started doing in response to what it thinks is unfair practices from the United States, China is saying, okay, you're not going to sell to us our chips, or you're going to put some tariffs on us. We're not going to sell to you our critical raw materials. Or we're not going to sell to you, for example, magnets that are used from, made from these critical raw materials. And what are you going to do without that? And that's when it becomes a little bit complicated. Because, for example, United States now cannot produce this many of these critical raw materials themselves, especially, for example, rare earths. It's a very small group of materials, but they're used literally everywhere. Or, for example, United States cannot produce certain types of magnets. Just because they didn't do it in the past, they would always buy it elsewhere. And now China is basically the main producer and almost the only producer in the world of some of these specific materials. And when Americans hear that, okay, but then in exchange we're not going to get access to these critical raw materials, they understand that it means, okay, we cannot produce fighter jets. For example, a few factories in Europe stopped for a few weeks production of cars because they couldn't get supplies from China. And China is definitely using it as a negotiating leverage. Which makes America much less capable of introducing very harsh tariffs on China because China has something to retaliate with. So this is still all not resolved. I think this back and forth will continue for some time before, if ever, there is some equilibrium that will be fine. But in the current situation, both China and the United States, they have some leverages on each other to make sure that they cannot fully separate from each other, they cannot fully decouple, they still need certain elements that only produce in one country or another. So this is a little bit putting the lid on how far this tariff war can go right now. But it also means that exactly because both China and the United States now understand how much they depend on the other side for these technologies, there is more effort to make sure that they can produce this technology domestically. For example, now China invests a lot of money in making sure they can design these chips at home so that they don't have to buy from the United States. And conversely, for example, the United States now is investing a lot of money and a lot of effort to make sure that they can either get these critical raw materials at home or process them at home, or at least they can buy it from other countries and not from China.
Yeah, decreasing the dependence on each other might be a key. But let's say if the relationship and the trade war escalates, and there is this silence between the United States and China now. Probably they are negotiating, lawyers, accountants, everybody, and the company standing behind to see how the decisions made by the White House and the Congress might affect the relationship between Beijing and Washington, D.C. The question is, like, if tomorrow there's substantial trade war between the United States and China, and you already mentioned some of the instances with the military-industrial complex. How would this, in perspective, affect, for example, American capability to support Ukraine or American military industry and the military development? Should we in Europe be concerned about the potential effect on very harsh trade war between the United States and China and our security?
Yeah, first, exactly because there's these dependencies, I don't think there's going to be a massive trade war, because both countries calculate that impact and think maybe we can stop somewhere midway and find at least somewhat manageable settlement. I think that's going to go in this direction. But of course, it's a good exercise to think what happens if there are, in this case, no supplies from China. For example, we know that because Americans have been providing some help to Ukraine, they're also selling weapons to Europeans, but also there's a lot of weapons, let's say missiles that were used, let's say, in the operations that were carried out in Iran or to support Israel. For example, if we take these missiles, it's not that basically impossible to produce them if you don't have certain critical raw materials. And Americans don't have stockpiles of these materials that are big enough to make sure that they can carry on for years without buying more from China. And at this moment in time, it's simply impossible to get it anywhere, which means in this like hypothetical scenario that the production of certain types of missiles can stop, or certain types of like fighter jets can stop, at least in the foreseeable period of time, if there's absolutely no supplies from China. So of course Americans like understand that well and trying to find some exceptions, and of course give some carve-outs to China as well for the areas that are important for them in exchange. What it means for Europe, of course, like if we are reliant on the production in the United States, that means also Europeans cannot get this equipment that they hoped for if Americans cannot produce it. But by the way, the same means also for European industries, because European industries are equally reliant on the same materials. So there's even like direct effect that, and Chinese know that very well. They know that like why only restrict it on Americans? We will also have to restrict it on allies because, you know, they trade with the United States, or just to impose extra pressure. They can do the same for Europeans as well. So there can be some shortages there. Of course, like Europeans and Americans understand this problem very well. So in many ways, there is paradoxically a lot of push and opportunities for Europeans, Americans, Canadians, but also other countries in the world to create alternative supply chains. Meaning that we understand that it makes no sense for us to be just reliant on China for these critical components. We need to make sure that we work with other countries to make sure that we can get them elsewhere. This is not easy. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in a year. It's going to probably take quite a few years to replace that. But this understanding that this production can literally stop if China cuts off the supplies pushes Europeans and Americans to find some collective ways to solve this problem.
I think in the crisis, you know, it's like such as oil crisis of 1973, we have been quite efficient finding some good solutions and alternatives for something that we cannot get from the Middle East or somewhere else.
Yeah, this is true. The difference is that oil is like the same oil everywhere, and like, okay, you can't get it from the Middle East, you can go to other parts of the world, and it's not that complicated to extract oil. It's, I mean, relatively. Which the situation is different with this, let's say, rare earths metals. Yes, you can dig them out of the ground, but then making sure that you can extract that from this rock and process them in a way that you use them in this high precision missiles or in the magnets that are used in the car, it's actually very difficult. And in many ways, like Western countries, because we were not doing it for many years and didn't care, we don't even have the technology and know how to get it done. So it's not like even the problem is both that, okay, we need to find this rock somewhere, but even if we find these rocks in some other countries, it's so complicated to process these rocks that it's not solvable within like a very short period of time. It's possible, but it will take some time to get there.
Do you see Europe as more or less vulnerable between this competition that is going on between the United States and China? We don't have like global players, global companies, global tech firms. Yesterday we had a really interesting discussion about how many sophisticated artificial intelligence models has the European developed in comparison to the United States. I think it was like 4 to 40, and with PRC it was 4 to 15. So Europe is lagging behind. So like the European Museum in terms of technological advancement comparing to the United States and China, does this competition make us more or less vulnerable? Do we depend on the outcome of this competition? For example, if China has learned to develop chips that are better in the United States, maybe the competition in global technological market is already lost.
There are two elements here. First, of course, we all depend on this competition because, like, if we mention if there's trade war, it's going to concern everybody regardless if they directly participate or indirect effects. Or, for example, if we take this artificial intelligence, because I don't think that absolute majority of Europeans would want a Chinese AI just because the way how China's society is structured, there's a lot of censorship, it's a pretty society that's controlled politically in all spheres of life. I don't think Europeans want that. So for Europeans, more democratic AI systems that reflect more privacy concerns or individual rights, that would be much more acceptable for absolute majority of Europeans. So there is a stake for Europeans in this general competition between America and and China in terms of what kind of AI models will develop. But interesting moment here is that in many ways it does not really important who is the first to invent technology. So in many ways it doesn't really matter whether it's an American company that's invented certain AI technology or something else, or whether it's a Dutch company or maybe some South African company, for example. Because for most of these technologies, where the most value comes from is how well you embed it in your economy and society. Because even now you can take the AI system, doesn't matter who actually invented it, but you can integrate it in your car manufacturing plant, or you can integrate it into your financial services and make sure that your financial services or your car manufacturing plant performs much better. So the countries who will be able to take these technologies from doesn't matter where, and embed it in its economy will receive the most advantage, both economically and societally. So for Europe, what we really can focus on is not just like having some tech leader company who is going to be inventing it, but also making sure that we can take this technology and disperse it across society.
Yeah, thank you. I think Europe has to be more open, more embracive to technologies to make our markets more competitive, dynamic. And this is, I think, a really good conclusion. To what extent do you see this openness, like to innovation, technological savvy, the ability for individuals and competitiveness for of the universities? You know, it's like showing the best potential for innovation. Does, for example, Central Eastern Europe has a capacity? Do you hear us as an opportunity in the United States? For example, Central Eastern European countries, should we be more active with the US and global tech companies to make sure we become a part and we become the foundation also of this global technological advancement?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually very interesting because one of the big areas of competition is competition for people with skills that are relevant for AI or new technologies and everything. And Central and Eastern European countries actually have a lot of very skilled engineers, including in IT services, in AI, but also in other areas. And this is a huge resource. We already have now a lot of cases when even big American companies, be it Microsoft or Google, they all have offices in the region, be it in Poland or Czech Republic or in Riga or Vilnius or elsewhere, because they know that there is actually a lot of people who they could use to work for them. And this is a very rare resource. So Central European countries have this advantage that we actually have pretty good education system. We have a lot of people who have the right skills. Of course, there's always more that's needed, but we have a huge starting point. So we should definitely capitalize on the human resources that we have here. What we're not good at is to making sure that these engineers, the people who know how to code or how to set up AI system, we are terrible in making sure that these applications are actually relevant for the markets. We know how to design some more theoretical system or make some scientific breakthrough, but we are not good at making sure that this breakthrough actually works in a factory or how to actually make money economically on this breakthrough. So one area where we can improve to make sure that these people not just get hired by the big companies, but produce even more value is to make sure that our people are also trained in knowing how to apply all these scientific innovations in very practical settings and bringing them to economic development.
Thank you. I think this is a very good note to conclude, because Farid Zakari, he wrote a book in defense of social sciences. And I think the social scientists are the ones who see what is necessary for the economy, for the society, for politics to make the everyday processes smoother, less dependent on bureaucracy, red tape, intense, management in exchange, for a really good technological solutions. And we really have great scientists. We just have to learn how to take our patents, scientific innovations, and apply them to solving the practical problems to be more competitive, on global markets, and to be useful for the companies from the United States and global tech. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to record the Riga Security Forum episode with Alena Kudzko, who is a director of US GLOBSEC Foundation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.